Good morning. Welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at www.igbatt.com. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website. Now, our organization, like I said, provide information and support while encouraging hope and faith. We have resources. We can connect you to resources in the community. We provide counseling, therapy, and just a lot of different services. So please check out our website. Today, I wanted to come live briefly and talk a little bit about some of the things that's been going on, mainly Frank James. Now, if you don't know who Frank James is the individual who has been accused of accused right now of opening fire on several people in New York. I believe it was up like 24 people were wounded. I could be wrong with that, but that's who Frank James is. That's his name, Frank James. I think by now, if you're in America, you know who I'm talking about. If you've watched the news, I think this happened now about a week ago. I'm recording this on April 16th. This happened about a week ago. His name is Frank James. And I wanted to talk about Frank James. I wanted to talk about two things. I wanted to talk about severe mental illness, and I also wanted to talk about personality disorders as well. A lot of times people will say, oh gosh, every time something happens, you guys always want to talk about mental illness. And that's true. Mental illness does play a big role. So, but I want to say this, a person can have a mental illness, but still be competent. So I think a lot of times we get that mixed up. A person incompetence is different. It's different than saying a person is competent, incompetent, um, versus, having a mental illness. Because having a mental illness doesn't mean that you're necessarily incompetent. The stature, I can tell you, at least here where I live at, everyone is deemed to be competent unless a judge or someone else says that you're not competent. Okay, so having a mental illness doesn't get people off, but I think many times that's what we think. We think that if a person says they're mentally ill, I'm sorry, I'm working on my light here. If a person says that they're mentally ill, that somehow that means that that's like a get out of free jail card, and that's not the case. But I want to first let me start off with this, okay? And we've talked about this before, severe and persistent mental illnesses. First of all, we know when I say severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're talking about a subset of mental illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life in a negative manner. Severe and persistent mental illnesses include things like schizophrenia, bipolar, psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders. When we're looking at, you have mental illnesses, you have that category, and then you have the subset where we talk about severe mental illnesses. Sometimes we call it severe and persistent mental illnesses, but they're all the same. When we say severe and persistent mental illnesses, or severe mental illnesses, we're talking about illnesses. It's a category. It's actually the federal government actually set up this category because we recognize that the individuals living with the symptoms of severe and persistent mental illnesses, their symptoms are really severe, and we have a lot that we have to pay attention to with that. So you have severe and persistent mental illnesses. Now, what are the consequences of non-treatment? Let's talk about that. We know more than 1 in 5 individuals will experience severe mental illnesses or mental illnesses in general. We know that mental illnesses do not discriminate, age-wise, race-wise, it doesn't matter. Everyone is impacted by a mental illness, either directly or indirectly. So you may say, well, I've never known, I don't have a mental illness, I'm not impacted, and I don't know anybody in my family. But when we look at some of the consequences of untreated mental illnesses, one of the consequences of untreated mental illnesses is the person is being unable to work, right? Or they work sporadically, which means what? If they're not working, then that means their benefits, their Social Security or Medicaid, which in fact the society is paying for. So everybody does benefit from it or is impacted. But let's talk about some of the consequences of non-treatment. We preach here it's important to get treated for mental illnesses. The longer a mental illness goes untreated or poorly treated, the outcome is poorer. It's harder. We also know that many mental illnesses start, or we can start seeing evidence of it when a person is young, right? And then as they go on, sometimes without treatment, the symptoms can get worse, right? So when we talk about the consequences of non-treatment, we look at, especially when we talk about severe mental illnesses, we're talking about homelessness. We're looking at arrests. As far as in school, the person suffers a lot in school, meaning they may be in and out of school. They may be unable to stay in school. They may be have difficulty with relationships in school because they feel different. A lot of people, kids, young people, start using drugs or turning to alcohol or drugs. They do it because it makes them feel good, but what they don't really realize is that they have an untreated mental illness, bipolar sometimes or mood disorder, that if they got the right medications, it would be better for. But because they don't know what's going on with them, they don't have the right medications, they're using illegal substances. And the illegal substances lead to uh, other problems, increased problems. So again, when we look at the consequences of non-treatment with mental illnesses, we're looking at people who don't are not receiving treatment tend to be homelessness. We're looking at in and out of jail. We're looking at being incarcerated. We're looking at being victims of crimes. And we're looking at just a whole host of other problems. We're looking at an inability to form good relationships. Um, Many times, these people, as I said, are victims of crimes. Sometimes they do commit crime, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to first start off talking about number one, the importance of getting evaluated, the importance of getting treatment. Second, to understand that anyone can be impacted by a mental illness. And three, to make the distinction between mental illness, severe mental illnesses, which is a subset of the mental illness category, if you will. So when we talk about severe mental illnesses, please know that many people, the majority of the people who are diagnosed with a severe mental illness and who are taking their medications that are in treatment are not dangerous. However, we do know that individuals who are diagnosed with a severe mental illness, who are not taking their medications, and who are psychotic, psychosis, meaning being out of touch with reality, or psychotic, and especially if they're taking any form of substance, they can be more dangerous. Okay, so I just want to say that. I'm going to read this again. Most people with a severe mental illness are not dangerous, so it's important to remember that. Many times, people with a severe mental illness are more likely to be victims of crime. I know many of the people that I work with, our brothers and sisters, I call them, that we work with, they get robbed, they get beaten up. Some of the women get raped. They just get abused by people in the streets, family members. So many times, people with the SMI, severe mental illness, are more likely to be victims of crimes. Okay. However, violence is more common present with people with SMI who are untreated. So that's why it's important to get treatment. It's important to get treatment for all of us. There's treatment out here. No one needs to suffer with symptoms of a mental illness, right? But it's really important as well for people with SMI because one of the hallmarks of SMI is psychosis and being out of touch with reality. So it's really important that we get a person connected to treatment. Okay. Now let me go back to Frank R. James. I did just a little research on him. And again, I'm not diagnosing Frank R. James. I'm just looking at what is coming off the media so far about him. And I thought it was interesting because I was going to talk about severe mental illnesses. Well, we talk about that all the time, but the importance of getting treatment. And then this happens, and that really emphasized to me again that it's important to get a person treatment. Now, before I get into, let me do this. Personality disorders. Personality disorders are, you have personality traits. We all have personality traits, certain traits that we have. And then there are personality disorders. Personality disorders are categorized as a mental illness, right? Under the mental illness heading, under the big book we call the DSM-5, which I've talked about before. So personality disorder, what is a personality disorder? A personality disorder is a rigid, unhealthy pattern of thinking, functioning. It is a way a person thinks. They think in such a way that is odd, that is strange, that's different. which it would be okay if that's where it stopped. But the difference, the oddness, the rigidness leads to relationship problems, leads to problems with work, leads to problems with their family, with their spouse, problems with society. So a lot of times when we look at a lot of the people who are, I don't want to say career criminals, what we're looking at is somebody with personality disorders. We're looking at somebody with an antisocial personality disorder, or someone who is the name yeah, just left me. But you're looking at somebody with an antisocial personality disorder. Um, well, I'm blocking now. But anyway, you're looking at a person with a criminal behavior, okay? So personality disorders. So personality disorders are categorized as mental illnesses under the heading. It's a different type. It's a subset of a mental illness, because when you're talking about with a personality disorder, like I said, the way they think is so rigid. I think that I should have this. I think that you offended me. I'm going to pull out a gun and shoot you. That's what we talk about antisocial disorder. We talk about sociopaths. I'm sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Sociopaths, psychopaths, antisocial personality disorders. Those are all part of mental illness or personality disorders. But like I said, just because you have a mental illness or diagnosed with a mental illness doesn't mean that you didn't know what you were doing at the time. So again, I think that we get upset about that, because again, we think when a person says that they have a mental illness and they commit a crime, that somehow that absolves them of that. Not necessarily, because a person can still be competent. It's different. Having a mental illness doesn't mean that you're incompetent. Okay, so just remember that. So again, when we look at Frank R. James, and I was looking at some of the things that they talked about, how they described him, it could be sounds definitely a personality disorder, or it could be some type of psychosis, or sometimes type of severe mental illness. Not sure. I'm not trying to diagnose him, but I wanted to share this with everybody. According to this, he had decades of disputes. I mean, years and years of getting in trouble, of relationship problems, petty offenses. This is a person that's traveled all across the country. The report said from New York to Milwaukee. He has a history of being evicted, a history of making threats, living in rooming houses, moving, erratic work history. The one report described him as, and I'm taking this from the newspaper, and I wish I would have written it down, but this particular quote is from the newspaper. A premeditated attack, a lone actor with mental illness, driven by anger and hate, who had a desire to kill. So they said a premeditated attack. This is somebody, he thought about this. He did this by himself. He has a mental illness, but he was driven by anger and hate and had a desire to kill. So, but when you look at this guy's history, family members describe him, says he has a mental health problems for a long time. So this is someone who had mental health problems for a long time. This is someone who has a history of being evicted, yelling at people, poor relationships with individuals. He had a history of drifting, which means that from going from place to place, which means he couldn't really get along with people. That means he had difficulty with relationships, difficulty on his jobs. So this person had a problems for a long period of time. He had a long history of police. I think I read that he was arrested like about 9 times, several times, but they were all for petty offenses, which is why he was able to get a gun, because he didn't have a felony. But this is what happens. This is a picture of someone with a poorly treated or untreated mental illness. And like I said, just because we acknowledge the fact he has a mental illness doesn't mean that it absolves him of what he did. Okay, but he has a long history. Whether it's some type of psychotic disorder, or if we're looking at a personality disorders, antisocial, psychopath, sociopath, um, he has a long history. So, what is the importance? That's why it's so important. This is one of the consequences of poorly treated or untreated mental illness. When it's also important to have the right person, the right therapist, the right individual working with certain types of people. Because when you look at, I always say this, people, I work in a community mental health clinic, and a community mental health clinics, a lot of times we get a bad rap because people, think we just get a bad rap, right? But I would rather, I'm telling you, when it comes to severe mental illnesses, the best place is a community mental health clinic, because far as the providers, because usually there we've seen it all. We work with a lot of different people. We're not we don't discriminate. The good thing about a community mental health, you can work with somebody with depression today. Tomorrow it could be schizophrenia. The next day it could be anxiety. You work with the whole gamut, right? So I say this to say, because as I looked at his report, well, not his report, but what was written, that this person evidently was in treatment, but it sounds like, according to him, it didn't work out. Well, I can imagine it didn't work out, because if he has a personality disorder, a person can have both. A person can have a severe mental illness or a mental illness and then have a personality disorders. Because see, a lot of times we don't really see personality disorders, or we don't view personality disorders as being as having a person being mentally ill. We say that's just the way that person is. And that's true. We all have a personalities. We all have different characteristics, different traits, which is fine. It doesn't become a disorder unless it starts causing certain problems, or we start seeing certain symptoms. So when we're talking about a personality disorder, we're saying that the traits, the characteristics that this person has, that's their personality, is so egregious that it's impacting negatively how they impact, how they view the world, how they see the world, how they impact with relationships. So that's kind of what we're saying there. So that's why it's considered a mental illness under that category. But again, it doesn't absolve anyone from not being able to face the consequences of what they've done. So antisocial, psychopath, sociopath, still considered mental disorder, even though we don't like that. I think many of us, we just don't like the way that feels, because it's a that's their personality, and that's true. But the way the DSM-5, which is the as I, I mm, I'll show it to you the next time, but as the DSM-5 book, is listed as a personality disorders are listed as mental health conditions, right? Mental health conditions because of the impact that it has on that individual. Personality disorder because of the impact it has on the individual and everybody else, okay, in a negative manner. So sounds like Frank James maybe has some type of personality disorder, and he could may have some type of psychosis as well, being out of touch with reality, or another type of mental disorder. Okay, you can have two. And when I talked about Kanye West before, we mentioned that. I talked about before, how a lot of people with Kanye West, because of his personality, people are not as sympathetic towards his symptoms. Okay, this is a person who's been diagnosed, from what I understand, I don't know him, with some type of mood disorder. It sounds like, it looks like bipolar, maybe bipolar one. Not really sure because I don't know him, but based on what I've seen and what I've heard, the reports, we're looking at somebody with a bipolar disorder, diagnosed with bipolar, who also has a personality, a very strong personality. Two things, both things could be true at the same time. So it doesn't mean that just because um, you don't like someone doesn't mean that we overlook the fact they have a mental illness. Because people will say, well, he wasn't mentally ill when he did A, B, or C, and that's true, because the psychosis lifted. If if he's taking medications, we would expect him not to see the psychosis, not to see some of the symptoms that we're seeing that may be associated with bipolar. But when we talk about personality disorders, unfortunately, do not lend medications don't necessarily work as well with personality disorders. Okay, personality disorders, um, even sometimes therapy doesn't really work, but as well. But yeah, that's what we talk about personality disorders. So again, when we talk about Frank R. James, to me, this is another example why it's important to get mental health treatment. First of all, it's important for us to understand what mental illnesses are. It's important for us to understand what severe mental illnesses are. It's important for us to understand what the different treatment options are, and just to understand that a person can have a personality as well. And for us to know that our system in America, I'm talking, it's not, some places are better than others. We talk about our broken mental health system. Yes, there are a lot of things that need to be fixed, but there's a lot of things that are right with our mental health system. and we need to work together to kind of get people who need treatment. What I wanted to say before I drifted off about Frank R. James, it sounds like, just for me working in a mental health clinic and understanding and seeing it firsthand, it sounds like this person may have been in treatment, according to him and his family members, when he was in treatment. Um, that because of his personality, that he didn't stay in treatment, and that happens sometimes. Sometimes people don't stay in treatment because of psychosis. When I'm talking about a person psychotic, out of touch with reality, they don't realize they need to take medications. They don't realize they need to take treatment. When a person doesn't realize or understand that they need to take medications or that they need treatment, that is a symptom of their illness. So they may not stay in treatment, versus someone who won't stay in treatment because they feel like they're special. They feel like the therapist doesn't understand. They feel like they're better than everyone else. That this is beneath them, basically because of their personality. So because of their personality disorder, they're unable to stay in treatment. They won't stay in treatment, so they leave. So it sounds like maybe this was something going on with Frank James. Just some of the reports again that I've seen, because he said he was in treatment, and he said the system was racist and the system was whatever. I can't speak to whether the system was racist or not, but given what I know about him and just a little bit that I read about, is more than likely that his personality disorder played a part in him not being able to stay in treatment. And again, from what I read, from what I'm seeing, it sounds like, in addition to whatever other illness he has going on with him, that this is a person that also has a strong personality disorder, maybe antisocial, psychopath, sociopath, et cetera, et cetera, in addition to what's going on as well. Not diagnosing him because I don't know him, and I'm just, again, looking at the reports. So when you're looking at someone, what can we do? What we can do is, first of all, start with your children. Start with other people's children, or maybe nieces, nephews, or whatever. Start being more aware. Start talking to your kids. One of the things that we do know, that many of the illnesses, you can start seeing traits, right, when a person is young. So you want to start having conversations. You want to begin to build problem solving skills, abilities within your children, right? Get them to start talking about what's going on with them, and help them develop problem solving skills. Help them to kind of to talk, and just to kind of find out what's going on with them. That's number one. Number two, when you see someone, even as an adult, and if you're concerned about them, let them know that you're concerned about them. Hey, Miss Brent Jane, I'm noticing A, B, or C. Are you okay? You know, talk to the person, find out what's going on with them. Many times that will get a person talking and hopefully get them into some type of treatment and get them help. One of the things everyone has to realize, mental illness, it can impact any of us, right? Mental illness can impact family members, friends. It can impact me. It can impact you, because they're different types. So, for example, you may be fine now. I'm talking about schizophrenia or severe mental illness, but something can happen, and you can, as a result of that, now you're dealing with PTSD, right? So PTSD, people ask, okay, what causes a mental illness? There's no one cause, and we can't pinpoint it. It varies with different illnesses. We know some illnesses that are genetic. We know some illnesses that come from environment, like PTSD, right? So again, it's mental illnesses are anybody, okay, our friends, family, us. So we have to be sensitive to that. And number one, get help when we need it. If we have a family member, friend, we need to encourage them to get help and support, because the longer a person goes without treatment, the worse it is. And in some cases, if a person doesn't get treatment, along with their strange ideas, quote unquote, the government is out to get me, along with, this is a sexist, racist society, et cetera, et cetera. They feel like they're special, that they should deserve such special treatment. All of these type of views and ideas, along with the psychosis, can be problematic. So again, I'm just here to encourage everyone to be sensitive to mental illnesses, to understand that just because a person has a personality disorder, a personality that you don't like, doesn't mean that they're not suffering as well. It just means that they're a jerk. You can have a person who's diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that person could be a nice person, or you can have a person diagnosed with schizophrenia who is just a jerk, somebody you don't like. Even after they're not hearing voices and they're fine as far as that goes, you realize you just don't like the person, and that's okay, because we all have personality disorders. But just because a person has a personality disorder doesn't mean that they're not sick, that they don't have a personality disorder. And again, all of these are personality disorders, but we tend to vilify the personality disorder more. We're not as sympathetic to people with personality disorders, right? I'm not as sympathetic to a psychopath or a sociopath or someone with an antisocial personality disorder because they robbed me, they hit me over the head and stole my purse, or um, the mass murders, or whatever the case is. The antisocial sociopath, they tend to be people that we don't like. These are the people, the Jeffrey Dahmers. These are the people that are in jail for multiple murders. These are the people who manipulate people, and these are the people that we don't like. Okay, so we're not as sympathetic. We don't see them as being um, on as well. They're not nice people per se, but we don't see them. We're not sympathetic towards that group, but they're still diagnosed as a mental disorder. Psychopath, sociopath, antisocial, still a personality disorder, just like a person with depression, person with anxiety, a person adjustment disorder, just like a person with schizophrenia or bipolar, or whatever. They're still diagnosed with mental disorders. They're just different categories, if that makes sense. You have the mental disorder, and then there are different categories under that. So just kind of keep that in mind. So find out what you can about mental illnesses. If you see someone around you that's not the way they used to be, one of the things I always like to say, that when you change, when you look at mental illnesses, whether it's mental illnesses, severe mental illnesses, one of the hallmarks change. A person that used to eat a lot, they're no longer eating. A person that didn't used to eat a lot, now they're eating all the time. A person that used to sleep all the time, now they're not sleeping well. You used to sleep all the time, yeah, and now you're sleeping. You didn't used to sleep at all. Now you're sleeping all the time. So again, it's about change. Mental illnesses impact our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It impacts the way we think. It impacts the way we feel. It impacts the way we behave. It impacts the way we relate to our environment. Changes. So you're going to see changes. So if you notice a person is a friend of yours, see different. They seem more withdrawn. They're not talking as much, especially when they used to talk all the time. They're not going out for coffee like they used to go out for coffee. Find out what's going on with them. Just conversely, you have someone that's doing the opposite. You want to kind of pay attention and ask questions. A lot of times people will say, "Oh, I didn't know they were going through this. I didn't know they were, this was happening." And then when you start looking at it, and you start looking at maybe the last week or last month or last year, the person showed signs, but we just didn't pay attention to it. We have to learn to pay attention, number one, to ourselves, because many of us are under stress. Many of us, you with this pandemic, you're eating more, you're eating less. Some of you, you're sleeping more, you're more depressed, you're more anxious. Just look at how people are driving. People are just driving like they're possessed. Some of them, like something's wrong going on with them, and they're just driving 90 miles an hour. Many of us are under stress right now. So we have to learn to pay attention to ourselves and to take care of ourselves. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. So again, this has been It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, igbattmho.org. You can give us a call or email us at igbatt, the number one, at AOL.com. And I wanted to come today to encourage everyone to get treatment for mental illness, for mental support if you need it. There are consequences to untreated or poorly treated mental illness. And we just saw, in New York, we just saw what happened with the gentleman, Frank R. James, and the 24 people that got wounded. I believe it was 24 people that got wounded in the Brooklyn subway after he opened fire with a weapon. Okay. You will say, oh, everything is not a mental illness. It is a mental illness, but it doesn't mean that the person is incompetent. So again, there is a difference. Okay, competency is not the same as necessarily having a mental illness. Because I could be diagnosed with schizophrenia and still be competent. Okay, to stand trial. So it doesn't mean just because a person has a mental illness, we're saying that they get away with they should get away with anything. We're not saying that at all. So just be aware that we need to have better treatment. We need to have better treatment in jails. We need to have more money to fund different programs. We need more people out on the workers in the mental health field that are able to be out on the street. We need more police officers out on the street. So just keep that in mind. So thank you for joining me. I will see you next week. God bless and have a great day.